Welcome back. Now, women in Kenya have never shied away from using their voices in protest or the fight for freedom. As Women's History Month wrapped up yesterday, we will spend the last installment highlighting the legacy of activism among Kenyan women. From Mary Muthoni Nyanjiru, a political activist remembered for leading the protest after the arrest of Harry Thuku on March 16, 1922. She was shot dead while demanding the release of the freedom fighter along what is today Harry Thuku Road. Now, to Muthoni wa Kirima, also known as Field Marshal Muthoni, who fought in the Mau Mau uprising in the 1950s. She carried out single-handed raids for food from the colonialist farms. Well, this got the attention of revered Mau Mau leader Dedan Kimathi, who made her the only female field marshal. And the memorable scenes of mothers of political prisoners who staged strikes lasting 11 months in 1992 after unsuccessfully petitioning the then Attorney General Amos Wako to free their sons. The mothers took matters into their own hands and camped at Uhuru Park's Freedom Corner. An attempt by police to disperse them with batons and tear gas saw the women strip naked, an image that drew international headlines. And Nobel Peace Laureate Professor Wangari Maathai revolutionized the act of protest in Kenya by centering it on the female body. She brought women into the center of political discourse in this country. The demonstrations she initiated under her Green Belt movement marshaled women all over Kenya to plant trees, helping to preserve the green spaces that we enjoy today. Now, tonight we look at and take a look back at the sacrifice of these women and speak to some young women activists who now hold the baton. Joining me in studio are Rachel Mwikali, a gender justice activist, and Njoki Gashanja, political and social justice activist. Thank you both for joining me tonight. Let me start with you, Rachel. When you look back at some of those women we've just highlighted, and you look at the evolution of activism over time, what has changed, what has stayed the same?
Interesting, and thank you for hosting us. And this is the right time to have that conversation. If you look back pre-independence, and the names of the amazing women that you have mentioned, and some of them I've met them, like Field Marshal, I met her. And when having a conversation with her and the role they played in being inside, fighting the freedom of Kenya in terms of fighting the colonialists in plantation, but at the same time playing the role of intelligence, right, to pick intelligence to support our comrades, their comrades who are supporting for liberation of this country. They did amazing work. But the issue was that the work they were doing that was very internally and intense, they never got the visibility of the work that they were doing. And this is a question also we have been having within the activism space, where women, even us young women, who do a lot of work around activism, but our issues are never visibilized. Come to past independence, now after us having independence, where we have had people like Martha Karua, we have had people like also Nyiva Mwendwa, Charity Ngilu, who have been working within the political space, and being that they played a critical role. Their war rooms, some of them were in courtrooms, their war rooms, some of them were in public spaces and public leadership position, but it was never visibilized. But you see, through this kind of transition is what has inspired some of us. And when you ask me now currently, what is the trajectory of the activism? Right. And I'll be specific with the current status of right to protest. Most of us, including me, we have led big protests in this country, especially on end femicide in Kenya. We have led protests on also high cost of living. We have led protests on also calling out the government to protect women human rights defenders, right, because we have been killed. We have had cases like last year where we had an activist in Isiolo that was stabbed and murdered called Elizabeth Ikaru. So now when you ask me about the current trend, it means, one, we need as a Kenyan first to protect our right to protest. Right to protest is a human rights issue. We need to ensure that with this Public Order Act, it does not criminalize women. We have had instances when also we go to give the notification, because giving notification does not mean that you should not protest. First of all, the thing we experience is patriarchy and sexism in the police station. We have had issues even when we were planning protests and notifying the police, where they have to take you back and forth not to be able to speak for yourself, which it limits us from also pushing our agenda, the fact they see us as women. So the new frontier, even if you ask me, as a young woman living also in informal settlement, is the politics around our body. And I love the way you said also the politics around the late Professor Wangari Maathai, which I respect and I adore her. We have had now cases where now with the current regime, you see criminalization of women's bodies, and this does not only mean women's bodies who are on the front line like ourselves, but in general, where now we are having respectability politics that are coming that we can't access, let's say, contraceptive family planning, single mothers are being criminalized, women are dying because of unsafe abortion, but the country is not yet to talk about. We're seeing the teenage pregnancy going up, which affects also the trajectory of young women activists, but we'll have all CSA, mimi ni mama wa kanisa. So what does kanisa do us to do in terms of the law and criminalizing young women?
Let me bring Njoki in here because Rachel just talked about an issue of women activists not getting as much recognition for their contributions. And you see that throughout history. Yeah. Why has that been the case?
I mean, we're living in a patriarchal society, and when you're talking about patriarchy, is really about protecting the privilege and dominance of men. So it has been very deliberate from all the women that you have spoken about from history to our point that we are constantly silencing and erasing the role of women who are doing great things in the society, that we have normalized the, the subbing of women, that it is the women who will do this great mobilizing and great work, but it is the men who will get the credit. So ideally, it's just because that we're living in a patriarchal society. And when we're talking, and one of the things that must come out, even as we're talking about a patriarchal society, we must understand that this is a system. So you will find that we will also have women who have grown and have been socially engineered to prop up patriarchy. That is why there's always this fallacious statement of women are their own worst enemies. But patriarchy really is the enemy of women, because these women have grown in a patriarchal society where they've been socially engineered to, prop up the man and serve the man. So even in political spaces, you will not find women, because they will. There's been this narrative that is a preserve of men. The space and place of the women is home, and and even with the advent of the NGOs and the reform agendas, you will find that these agendas are very, very intentional about depoliticizing women. So you will have an agenda of women empowerment, but what really is women empowerment? What does it mean? Does it mean the liberation of women, really? Or does it mean that you can, yes, it is good, you can be a strong woman, but under certain, limitation. Be a strong, loud woman, but do not provoke the ego of patriarch. Yeah.
Interesting. You talked about depoliticizing women. Rachel, that reminds me of a report that Human Rights Watch did some time back on the uprising in Sudan. And it was titled, "Good Girls Don't Protest." Right? And so there's this whole idea that you have to kind of, generally women have decorum, you don't raise your voice, you don't rock the boat. But you have to for civil disobedience. Yeah. So how do you get more women into that space?
And I like what you're asking. That's why I came with this book that we did as Madara Women on documenting our stories of activism, on how we have been able to do activism. Because in most of the time, even if now you look at our generation, we have been in these streets. We know how these streets are. We have done this work. But you find the moment this narrative are brought is also to silence us, to gag us. And for me, what I usually say and encourage fellow young women also within the movement I'm part of, Coalition for Grassroots Human Rights Defender, is that the way injustice is designed is always to make us not to speak. And all our life, and I know even with you, Victoria, within your own field, you have to resist every day. And resistance does not mean you're a bad girl. Resistance means you stand for yourself. Resistance means, if you can look historically, all the women you have mentioned, they did it on our behalf. So it says, there's a quote I usually use it also when I hear it from also colleagues and comrades. Each generation has its own mission. And our mission for me with this generation first is to protect our constitution, and also for fight for two-thirds gender bill that we have been told not to talk already. We have like few women in power position, but also to encourage that some of these stories that we're able to document, we're able to talk, to encourage more young girls and more young kids to be able to understand that there have been women who have been resisting. And for me, this is also about the narrative that, even for example, when you talk about Professor Wangari Maathai, apart from being just a Nobel Peace Prize, I usually feel a profile, it was done in an unjust way. Prof was an activist. Prof was a feminist, a black feminist activist that was able to work collectively with the mothers of political prisoners, went to Freedom Corner and protest. That's an act of resistance. So this notion that, and I usually find it even in some spaces that people will say, it's not an act of African women to speak out, but what makes me an African? Already I'm black. So we have to resist that notion and encourage that the moment we speak out, also we participate in processes of democracy. And that's why you will see even the ongoing issue that is going in this country, even around protests. Women are not given the space to speak. Why? Because of that narrative. But when we're talking about, even if now you ask me, even when you look in this protest, I'm like, the first thing also is the state to protect women. Look at the commitments that were made by the former president, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, through the Kenyan government on Gender Equality Forum. He committed one of the commitments that Kenya is willing to support a feminist leadership. Kenya is willing to protect its women. And that also comes to my question that if we want to encourage more young women to be able to speak out and defend democracy, human rights, and women's rights in this country, the kind of machinery that we have been seeing being used in the public to prevent women from going to protest should be used to protect us not to be raped, should be used to protect us not to be violated, should be used to protect us that we are able to speak without feeling that we are being monitored, should be used to give us a platform that we know the work also we are doing, it's resource work. Because activism work around women, even when it comes to you when you are threatened, and you have a family, you are forced to flee in as an exile to another country and you're seen as a refugee, it's not the same vulnerability a male activist will experience. You can imagine if someone has kids, you're made to choose between your kids and yourself. You're made also if you have a partner, the partner is saying, oh, you left us in trouble. So you find that women have a lot to lose, but also it comes back to the country. When a woman speaks and they're vocal, how do you support them? When a partner, you know you're dating someone who is strong, I usually say and tell men, it takes a stronger woman to support a stronger woman or to date a stronger woman. It does not mean because your partner is a feminist or an activist, they cannot be supported. So it's not a competition. But also the other thing we need to encourage is also what you're doing now and Citizen, giving this platform to teach the public that civil disobedience is not a criminal act. Civil disobedience and activism is a way of also continuing that we are able to protect, defend, and promote human rights and not being criminalized. But also the current trend that we are seeing also when you go to protest, there has been a lot of sexual harassment by the police. When you protest, there's been a lot of criminalization. You find you've been arrested and then you're arrested in Nairobi. Now you have to be taken, let's say, to Machakos County. And most of this activism work, you're doing it based on conviction, based on passion. You're not an 8 to 5 human rights worker. You're doing it because you want to see some change.
Njoki, let me finish with you. When you look at the next frontier for the current crop of women activists, we just heard Rachel talk about implementing the Constitution and the 2/3 gender rule. What else do you feel still needs to be done?
I mean, a lot has to be done. We're going through a crisis as a country, and unless the women of this country rise up, we will continue, getting into the ditch. And just to put an analysis to this, we must interrogate the role of religion in pacifying and depoliticizing the women, because you will find in the political processes and the spaces, the women are absent. They're not in the decision-making table. So unless women are actually sitting in those decision-making tables, unless women are actually, taking that, being intentional about being in political processes, we will keep being, in this mess as a country. And it is very unfortunate that even with, with very important offices like Office of the First Lady, Office of the, Vice President, the biggest agenda that they would push is, this Christian fundamentalism and not a conversation of national unity. At this particular time when we're having causing all this unrest, it is those women who should come out, because in any time when there is unrest, it is the women who bear the brunt. So instead of these two powerful women who have the power and influence to actually, call these men to order and say that we need a national dialogue to actually have a way forward, they are busy, sending people to prayers, and no offense to the churches and religions,
right.
But we must actually understand the role that the religion has played in this country in trying to pacify the voices of women. So women of this country must understand, just like the RPP released political prisoners, women went out. It was because of their pain. It was because of the injustices of the children, of their children that were going through.
Right.
They went out for 11 months and they did not leave until all political prisoners. And ever since, that process initiated even the constitution process. We cannot remove that, from the constitution process. And we have never had political prisoners in this country again. But we are going back into the dark era. So the women of this country must realize that this whole conversation about them not being part of the politics must come to an end. They must be part and parcel. They must take, responsibility and rise up for this country. Those who have been elected must now forge a narrative that is towards national unity, not fanatism as we are seeing, And they should be ready to be called all these names, because women who speak are women who are bad-mannered. Wangari Maathai, Millie Odhiambo, Martha Karua, those are people who hold titles of bad-mannered girls.
All being criticized for their
all being criticized.
Boldness, yeah.
But we all need to be women who are bad-mannered, and we should all stand up for this country.
Thank you so much, Njoki and Rachel, for coming in and raising pertinent issues. Women still have a place in society and
also,
use their voices.
The other thing I wanted to add is around intersectionality of human rights issue. Women are not homogeneous. In the same way, like no one should be judged based on their gender and sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Like even what we have been seeing in the country, LGBTQ people being attacked, this should not happen, because human rights are indivisible. And if human rights are indivisible, we should not have a government that is policing us based on what they are calling moral, and saying this is African and not African, but the fact that we are black people, we are African.
We have to leave it there. Thank you so much, ladies, for coming in. That does it for the conversation. Let's take a short break. Sports news is coming up next.